The Boyden Memorial Lectureship promotes excellence in patient care by connecting medicine with the humanities and is made possible by the generous contributions of our supporters through the Providence St. Vincent Medical Foundation. Before I introduce our speaker, in the tradition of Providence, I'd like to offer a reflection. Hassan Hazari, a medical student at Queen's University, describes the value of art in medical education as follows. Art is a broadly used term, but I like to think of it as a vehicle to express experience, thought, and emotion. And though medicine is an applied science, it has other important facets that consider one's experience and humanistic aspects of patient care. It is no surprise then that medicine is described as a scientific entity, but its practice an art. Meaningful art, be it writing, poetry, or painting, often has strong emotions that fuel expression. Medicine is a career with no shortage of emotionally charged situations, and art offers a channel to reflect and grow from those experiences. And now it is my privilege to introduce our speaker, Alexa Miller. Alexa is founder of and consultant at Arts Practica, a medical education consultancy dedicated to the human practices that improve healthcare quality. A leading voice for observation and inquiry practices in medicine and for the cultivation of arts experiences, she is an original co-creator of the Harvard Medical School Training the Eye, Improving the Art of Physical Diagnosis, a course that produced researched outcomes on the impact of arts experiences on medical student learning. Driven by a strong personal interest and misdiagnosis in medical learning, she serves as a fellow with the Society to Improve Diagnosis in Medicine. She received her BA from Swarthmore College in Art History with extensive studies in education and African studies, and her MA from the Wimbledon School of Art, where her artwork focused on human resilience and medical imagery. She is extensively trained in visual thinking strategies for facilitation and coaching, and has received awards from the Creative Center for People with Cancer and the New England Museum Association. Please join me in welcoming Alexa Miller.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you so much to the Center for Ethics for inviting me, and for all of you for being here this afternoon. I see a bunch of familiar faces from the grand rounds this morning, and maybe some new faces as well, and I wanted to start just by a show of hands, just a sense of who's in the room. So could you raise your hand if you were at the grand rounds this morning? Okay, so most of you. Okay, thank you so much for coming back. What we're going to do this afternoon is going to be even more interactive. So as you eat your lunch, please know that I really want to hear from you. And actually, I think I would love to start actually just by hearing what has stayed with you since this morning. So just to do a little recap on the kind of main concepts and what you're taking from it. So my question to you is, like, what are the surprises? What are the learnings? What were the satisfactions or the dissatisfactions that are coming up for you, and also the questions sort of staying with you or coming up after the grand rounds this morning, the topics discussed? Yes.
So you, in the grand rounds this morning, had brought up the wrestlers.
Uh-huh.
I was a person who accidentally read the wrestlers.
Oh, you read it on the handout
first?
first? Oh, you did. Okay.
So I was exactly that person.
Yeah.
Who, when people started saying, this looks like rest, this looks like repose, could not see it.
Okay, interesting.
It took me quite a while to walk my own conception of what it should look like, what I should be looking for.
Yep.
Back. And so that kind of preconception, my own understanding.
Yeah.
That has stuck with me.
Okay, that is so interesting, and so despite my pedagogical design, my error actually of putting the title in the handout of the slides, actually gave you firsthand the experience of going into it with a frame, despite intentions to not do so. And so you experienced firsthand actually the challenge of the frame rather than freedom from the chain, the frame. And it sounds like you were wrestling in yourself to let that frame go, and it took some effort and some time. But were you able to let it go, or did it sort of stay held?
Yes, but still within the context of wrestling. So as I'm like looking at hearing these people say like they're resting, I'm thinking about like the times in wrestling where there's just a pause and like a rest.
Yep.
In that,
Okay.
So
it's really influential. You really experienced the influence of the frame. Okay. Well, that is everything okay, Eileen? I will repeat questions back. Right. Okay. So the overhead mics in this room are broken, and this is being recorded, so they want to make sure to capture everyone's questions. So I will try to remember to do that, and if I forget to do that, will you guys like remind me to do that? Okay. So all right. So that sounds like a very memorable experience of the influence of frames on our perception, what we see. Okay. Great. Yes.
In the same way, but what we've been taught or told or come to expect may not be the true reality.
Right. Okay. So that's a great pearl of wisdom, that our preconceived notions and our expectations really shape what we see. Okay. Yes.
When I first glanced at that, I immediately thought of Pompeii. I couldn't get that out of my mind.
Yeah.
At all. And then I found myself listening to what people were saying, and virtually everything they were saying, I could imagine those people back then having emotion, having thoughts, having those kinds of issues that you were talking about when you talked about the article.
Oh, wow. Okay, so interesting. So, when you had a first sort of instant association of Pompeii with what we saw, which stayed with you the whole time. And actually, that's common. I've heard that a lot before. And there is something there's like it's not a literal picture of a Pompeii figure, but there's some real Pompeii-ishness there. Whether or not the artist intended that, we don't know. But what I hear in your comment is also just the thinking of sort of the breadth of our humanity, and that the very same issues that we were talking about in the potential struggle or the potential embrace or separation or closeness of those figures, that all of those themes were alive and well and existing and playing out in humanity at the time of Mount Vesuvius erupting. Okay, great. So sort of just reflecting on our shared humanity and that was coming up for you in that work of art. Okay, yes? Yeah, our perception, our perception is one and the same with our experience, and it really shapes our experience. And we do have more control over our perception than we might think. That's one of the reasons why observation is so interesting to me, because we can sometimes. Somebody talked yesterday in one of the interactive sessions about how mood sometimes really influences what you notice. Like if you come home at the end of the day and it's been a really bad day, your house looks really messy, whereas it might not look so messy if you'd had a better day, and it might not really even be changing. But you can, we sometimes register into these preconceived ideas. It's a confirmation bias of what we're seeing. And we can at the same time use our observation, force ourselves to notice other things that are, things we're grateful for, things that are beautiful, things that are going to help us take steps to shape our perception, first to better calibrate towards reality, and second, really just to kind of advance our life and support our own resilience. But yeah, our mindset, our perception, our experience, our perspective on something, our point of view, are really all one and the same thing. Yeah. Yes.
The value of silence.
Can you say more about how or why that stayed with? Oh, the value of silence. The value of silence. So can you say more about how or why that has stayed with you, or what about that has stayed with you?
Being able to step into the experience and not allow it to be crowded out by that busyness that
Yes.
constantly, tracks itself.
Great. Great. And that's so to that, the ability to step into an experience and give it space and sort of stay in relationship with it in this sort of patient-centered kind of way, rather than trying to control it or feeling a need to fill it right away. And it's not to say it won't feel awkward, because there's always a void. You always feel it. Yes. Okay, great. So to recap what you just said, the experience of embracing uncertainty is what stayed with you, that you like that idea. Did you say being with it? Having that experience individually for yourself, and then also collectively with others. Okay, great. Yeah, and if I were, if you were to say, like, in a nutshell, like that's sort of the overall concept. And if I can feel I'm somewhat successful in my work and can sleep at the end of the day, it's in that. It's in helping people on the front lines of delivering care to human beings feel more enabled to approach uncertainty and embrace it and communicate about it. In terms of their own mental models in themselves and with other people and patients. Okay, great. So any other urgent last comments before we sort of dig into our next step here? Other things staying with you, or questions, surprises, anything else? Okay. All right, so I'm so glad that everybody is sort of at the same understanding of the material so far, so we don't have to, we can just, I'm just going to kind of keep going with some things. Okay, so I'm going to show you two pictures, and I want to ask you to imagine that we're going to have another discussion. We're actually not going to right away, but imagine I ask you what is happening in this picture, and it's going to be your job to respond to that question. And I want you to think about, so notice two things. I want you to notice what you would first say in that response to that question, what's happening in this picture, and second of all, how you feel in response to in response to that. Okay, so here is the first image. Oh, can we turn down the lights just a little bit? Thank you. Okay, so what's happening here? And here's the second image. What's happening here? Okay, so I'd like to hear from a few of you. What was it like? Don't answer the question, what's happening here in this image. We're not going to launch into an image discussion, although we might if there's time towards the end of this session. But I want to hear from you more about what it felt like to attempt to answer that question in response to this image.
Chaos.
Oh, chaos. Can you say more about that?
Everything looks angry and flapping around and no direct order to
Okay, so associations with everything looks angry, flapping around, and it seems to lack order. I'm just looking for the pointer, actually, which I don't see, but that's okay. Okay, how else did it feel? Yes.
Cool colors, actually.
Cool colors?
The hot
Oh.
color in the second one. I saw initially before it was all focused and the lights were out and everything. I just saw a lot of cool, swirly colors.
Okay. Okay, great. And how did it feel to you to attempt? It felt lovely. Okay. All right. Great. So cool colors, and as a result of the what it sounds like, sort of the appeal, but maybe the colors were appealing to you, and that felt restful and lovely and interesting. Okay. Yes.
Oh my goodness, I was uncertain
Okay.
about what I was looking at.
Okay. So you felt uncertain.
And I got like crow, but then what was going on in the other parts of the picture? I could, are those other birds? Are they like, what else is going on? I couldn't like I couldn't take it all in or really comprehend it.
Okay. Okay. Great. So a couple of things. You felt uncertain. You said you felt like you got part of it, like crow or bird. But then there were other areas where you couldn't quite locate right away, and it was there was like some overwhelm or just some like, what is that? And that it was an uncertain experience. Okay. A few more. Yes. Oh. Okay, so you were certain that if there was a correct answer, you were going to be wrong. Can you say more about that?
Well, it just felt very subjective. It's like I could
Okay.
come up with a million answers, but that none of them would be more right than another answer.
Okay.
Based on what I could see in this art, and I'm not an art expert, so.
Okay. Okay, so you felt a few things. It sounds like you actually felt like there was a lot to point out and describe, and it was unclear to you sort of what to prioritize and what might be important or right and what might not. And you were also feeling sort of the lack of a repository or a reservoir of like art historical schema to dip into, and sort of feeling at odds in that. Okay, yes?
So if this was a patient and you were a clinician, a clinical situation, you could say, that painting struck my eye as like, what is that specimen? What is that creature? Like I wanted to name it. And then the rest is the sort of the reality of the situation, the chaos, you could say, or the confusion. Whereas your next slide, it's very much a specimen. It has an
Okay.
exact name, field marks. It represents the disease itself, whereas this represents the situation that the disease is in. At least that's sort of what I got from looking at the second slide after you showed the first slide.
Okay, so those are great thoughts, and I want to like put them in the parking lot for like 10 minutes from now when we get into a comparison of them. But can you tell me, like, actually just referring back to your initial experience, thinking about how did it feel to describe what's happening here? What did that feel like for you?
I think it helped to have the second slide to think about how this slide makes you feel. I got more comfortable with this slide after I saw the second slide.
Interesting.
Helped me
Okay.
understand that this slide's not necessarily about trying to feel something more specific, but more loose, more uncertain, more
Okay.
nuanced. It gave some room for that.
Okay.
Whereas that second slide, if you hadn't shown the second slide, I think it would take longer to understand.
Okay. Okay, great. So what I'm actually hearing from that is like you felt maybe a need or you felt relief in receiving some kind of reference point, something to compare it to in order to like have a scaffold in, a foothold in. Okay. Any urgent last thoughts about what it felt like to respond to this first one? Yes.
I was surprised at how kind of pressured I felt to recognize something.
Uh-huh.
And then when I saw the little, what looked like a tree in the corner, the relief I felt like, oh, okay, well that's a tree.
Uh-huh.
And like
Okay.
judging, so I'm not quite sure, but
Great. That's very honest. I appreciate that. So you were looking to like really recognize something, and this feeling of like like not you found relief when you finally did recognize something in the leaf, and that it sounds like it was a more you felt pressure and anxiety to like actually just have a foothold in a strategy in or a way in. Yes. Okay, so you felt, and it sounds like you sort of immediately went into the picture and like felt a lack of, something was closing in on the bird and like a lack of control that the bird would have. Okay. Okay, great. So, these are all really helpful comments, and let's keep those in mind. What was it like to be asked to respond to what is happening here with regards to this image? What are we seeing? What was that like?
That's a cardinal.
That's a cardinal. Okay, and how do you know it's a cardinal?
It is red.
Because it's a cardinal, right? Because you've seen a cardinal. Right. Okay, great. Experience, pattern recognition. It's like if I showed an image of a Porsche. How do you know it's a Porsche? Because it's a Porsche, right? That's not, you don't even have to think about it. You just know. So my guess is, and I could kind of see it even in your eyes as I was looking out at this room, that with regards to this first image, it's much more complex, it's much more subjective, and it's much more confusing. There's heightened emotion in there. It's not immediately recognizable. And you actually had to like work and move your eyes around, and it's a much more complicated, complex, and uncertain experience than when we see something that we recognize from our past experience. And so one of the things that is extremely interesting to me about this is that in our this kind of comparison represents two very different ways of seeing, which actually are connected to two very different ways of thinking. And understanding these two different ways of thinking is extremely helpful in understanding how we as humans think and make decisions, and is also very helpful in understanding clinical judgment and how diagnoses or misdiagnoses get made. So the first way of thinking is, or actually the second, the way with the cardinal, that's referred to as system one thinking, which is pattern recognition based on past experience. And it's actually not even thinking neurologically. If you look at it, it's much more of a reflexive body process. It's automatic than analytical and needing sort of mindfulness and thinking through. So recognizing a cardinal like that is one and the same of if you're driving down the street and you see a red light and you just automatically put your foot on the brake. It's that kind of reflexive thought. It comes from the experience of interacting with the world. And the thing that is, there's a lot that's interesting about it, but the thing that's extremely interesting to me about it is that is basically intuition, right? System one is your intuition. It's not rational at all. When it's masterful and it's really fortified with a lot of firsthand experience and having sort of seen it all before, a lot of gray hair and wisdom and mastery, it is a true gift. And it's also a place where most errors occur. So it's a place of like extremely remarkable power, and also a place where we have to be very, very careful and check our thinking. The second style of thinking is system two thinking, which is much more mindful, much more slow, much more analytical, like what we did this morning in looking at the wrestlers. Actually, when we're doing the art viewing, visual thinking strategies process, we're all actually kind of toggling back and forth between system 1 and system 2. We're having our associations and our, our automatic responses, but we're also, we're also thinking analytically and mindfully and sort of updating our seeing as we go. So what starts out in system 2 is like that's where novice learners are most of the time as they're mastering new information and taking things in. That eventually, through repetition, becomes system 1 intuition and experience-based knowledge. Does this make sense? Does anybody have any just thoughts or questions about this? Yes.
I'm also a teacher.
Uh-huh.
And this makes so much sense because as we're, like if I talk about the Vietnam War, which I actually lived in and through and peered and everything, it's to me it's system 1 because it's so hardwired in me. And as I share it with my history students, it's like there's system 2. Like how is this different from the Civil War, from the Cold War, from the World War I? And they're learning all this stuff, and it's still in all their background, and they're trying to place it and put it and everything. And they're in a totally different place. Yeah.
Great. Okay, that's great. That is a beautiful example of how the things that our lived experience becomes our system 1, and it is so it's normal and automatic and natural to us. And if it's not the lived experience of somebody else, it is simply not. And it really speaks to the individuality also of our intuitions and our expertise, right? This is a perfect example of how our thought patterns, are never linear. And 2 really great diagnosticians might get to the same diagnosis through very different pathways. Which is why, okay, so back to the idea of that system 1, that intuition being a gift when it's really seasoned and masterful. So how do you learn that? Learning that is known to be not easy, but there are some hacks for facilitating it and expediting it. Does anybody have any thoughts or insights on what some of those are, how we actually learn that? Yes. Practice. Okay, so that's the real way. It's the only way, really. The only way is through active interaction with the environment and the material and feedback on how we're doing. So that's the main way. That's the main course. However, as novices interact with more seasoned, experienced, masterful practitioners, one thing that can be done is asking the seasoned practitioner to simply share their line of thought. So think aloud techniques. Have people heard of think aloud techniques? So this is a really great way. I've been teaching this in medical education, and we can experience so well in art how it's helpful. It's like sharing your reasoning process, simply sharing your line of thought. How that brings so much insight. But I now use it in all kinds of other areas in my life. Like I'll give you an example. I recently did a short contract at a business school, helping with an educational program there. And I was really new. This business school had its own culture and its own set of students coming from all over the world. And like the culture of the school was new to me. The audience was new to me. The way in which some of the faculty worked were completely new to me. And I was given this assignment to put together some materials for some executives from China. And I had no idea how to approach this. And so I went to a colleague and friend who had been at this business school for 10 years. And I just said, here was the assignment. Can you just think aloud for me how you would approach this? And she said, okay, executives from China, they need these 3 things. This faculty person, she wants these 3 things. And like, this is what has to get made. There's no way I could have come up with those things on my own, but hearing the line of thought of somebody who had the intuition really down was like extremely helpful for me, expedited my learning so much. And so asking somebody who's really, really good and experienced in something to simply think aloud how they would approach it is one way in which like novices can expedite their travel from System 2 to System 1 expertise. And everybody in the patient safety diagnostic error reduction sphere cannot promote the use of think aloud techniques enough. They are so valuable in the learning of great intuition, and also in the culturally within a learning community. Simply doing that, it becomes a cultural norm in supporting a learning community towards, everybody's working together to understand and learn a learning culture. It's also a technique that is useful in managing uncertainty with patients. Simply thinking aloud, okay, let's think through the processes that you've been through thus far, and let's think aloud our processes of our next step. That in itself reduces uncertainty and helps share a picture, an understanding of what is going on. So, and any thoughts or questions on that? Yes?
System 1, I think, includes heuristics.
Yes.
Rules of common sense.
Yes.
And sometimes people get stuck in System 2 when they don't give heuristics enough credit in the decision-making process. But then, of course, there's the risk of the heuristic being misused,
right.
something like that. But I think that's another, it's not really hard wiring, but maybe it's a personality trait that you might be more prone to heuristics in your own non-medical life, whereas someone else might be more scientific, more prone by personality to being very, I don't know, very scientific about it, trying to deduct.
Yes, so you're talking about the use of heuristics or mental shortcuts to get something, and saying that sometimes people actually can get stuck too much in System 2, whereas the right kind of shortcut or heuristic might actually be what's helpful. And you're also pointing out that there's probably some variation among individuals to the extent to which one is like inclined to use heuristics and shortcuts, or has certain sets of those tools, versus somebody else who's more inclined to be more methodical, scientific, or collaborative in their approach, which is all very true. And another strategy is often, if somebody is stuck, another strategy is simply to, say, okay, what's another line of thinking about this, and invite such a thing. And heuristics do work. They do run a risk of causing blind spots, but they also do work a lot of the time. So, it's not to say one is better or worse than the other. I mean, we actually need all styles of thinking and a flexibility. And I think the most important thing is having awareness of when one is in System 1 and when you're in System 2. And having that, so the uncertainty being basically the metacognitive awareness, the knowing of not knowing, being aware of how you're looking at it and thinking about it, and where that knowledge is coming from. And one of the things that I really enjoy about art viewing processes, especially with works of art that are more like triggering of immediate associations, or different kinds of reflexive responses, is you can actually start to learn that these two different states actually feel very different, and you can gain more awareness of the two. Any other thoughts or questions about System 1 and System 2 thinking, and connections to your own practice caring for patients or as teachers, helping others learn? Nobody knows when they go into medicine that they're also going into the business of teaching, but there they are. Teaching is part of their work. So, yes?
Well, just like when I was in Hawaii, just reading road signs was a system 2 for
Yeah.
me, because there were so many vowels, I couldn't figure out how to say it. And also, when we're looking at um, the Latin parts of different words and things like that, if we know it, it's easy.
Yeah.
If we don't, it's like challenging.
Okay, great. So actually, that's a great segue. You're pointing out that the two different styles of reasoning take a different amount of energy. Whereas system 1 is very fast and cheap and takes basically no mental energy at all. System 2 is quite slow and takes a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy and focus. And we really do feel that. Like when you go to a new place, when you travel around a foreign city, you feel exhausted by the end of the day because you've been in that system 2 state by necessity to get around. Okay, here's some fun facts about system 1 and system 2. That last one, the cognitive miser function. So the brain is lazy. The brain doesn't want to spend that energy all the time. And that's not a bad thing. That's just how our brains work. But we'll always try to default to system 1 unless we're really forcing ourselves to open our eyes. They can each override the other. So with awareness, you can deliberately, choose how you are going to look at and see and approach a situation. Uncertainty is always an invitation to invite either. Okay, so as I mentioned, these two different ways of seeing are actually two different ways of thinking. And if you look at some of the language around medical misdiagnosis, you see how it's really embedded. The way we see, that's another way to simply think about medical misdiagnosis. So an Augenblick diagnosis literally translates, that's the German for quick glance. Pat Crosscarry, who is kind of a world expert on this topic, says it's an impressive piece of medical showmanship, but in real life it is fraught with danger. We talk about biases in terms of tunnel vision or having a skewed view or a one-sided view or an error or mistake being something we overlooked or an oversight. So if you start to really break down the language around pitfalls in thinking, a lot of it really does come down to seeing and how we look. I thought this was very poignant. Has anybody seen this before? This is from the attention lab of Jeremy Wolf and Trafton Drew, who they study attention at Harvard Medical School. And they asked 85 very experienced radiologists to look at this radiograph and look for signs of cancer, which they did, which is a task to look for very nuanced, subtle findings. But 85% of them missed the gorilla, the size of a matchbook, on that upper quadrant. So they missed that gorilla not because they're bad people or not because they're doing a bad job at all. They missed it because they were told to look for signs of cancer, which are very subtle and tiny and hard to look. And clinicians are taught to be very goal-oriented in the way they look. So to look for signs of cancer, to look for deficiencies of this, to look for milestones of that, to look for signs of things. That is a very powerful way to learn pattern recognition, and it works a lot of the time. There is absolutely nothing wrong with goal-oriented looking, and when somebody gets really good at it, that system 1 intuition becomes quite amazing as a force for discovery. The only thing with that is that it's not the only way that we can look, and the more laser focused we get in our looking, that's when we miss the forest for the trees, and that's called inattention blindness, right? That's like when I'm looking so hard for a space to park my car in, I miss the guy in the gorilla suit over here. That's just normal. That's how our vision and our thinking works. But we can look in so many different ways. We have so much agility at stake in our attention and in our intelligence. And if those same radiologists had been asked not to look for signs of cancer, but had been asked the first question in the visual thinking strategies methodology, what's happening here? My guess is 100% of them would see that gorilla, especially if they had done so collaboratively. So going back to one of the practices we talked about earlier this morning, seeing for yourself, part of that is initially approaching it not in a looking for mindset, but a what's happening, questioning state of mind. I have gotten very intrigued, for example, in like how very masterful radio, what's the word? People who read radiographs, radiologists, thank you, approach radiographs. And one of the people I had the privilege of teaching with at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Kit Schaefer, who is a radiologist and also herself an artist, she talks about how in cases where she is concerned there might be a high likelihood for error or complexity, what she will do is, back to your original point about the wrestler, she will deliberately not read the case history. She will simply do a what's happening here sweep of the radiograph. Then she will read the case. Then she will go back to the radiograph and be looking for what she thinks she's supposed to look for. And then in the really complex cases, she will also do the same thing with a colleague. So this is like kind of the art of the masterful management of information and knowledge in relationship to being present with what we see that is so masterful in response to this challenge of how what we expect or what we think we know often shapes what we see. And so it's, it's something that's like so subtle and so nuanced and so connected to what artists do, to be able to know all you can know and then forget it and be totally present with what is there and work with what you see, in relationship with what you know. I think most importantly also, we can look in all these different ways and we can look with other people. And you guys have spoken a lot about how that's so clarifying to your own thinking as well as to a process of like what we are going to do next. I think it's very poignant to me that there's a lot of language of looking embedded in ideas about care and what it means to care and our goals of care. So looking after somebody, looking in on them. These are all terminology we use for like what it means to care for somebody. So, here's Odysseus. What's he doing, guys? He's looking and listening. That's why he was such a masterful, strategic navigator who could make it through anything, right? That agility. Okay, so what's our time? All right, it's 1:15. I have a couple works of art we could look at, although, I think we don't have time to do a proper discussion, but one thing that I think could be really cool is if we had a mini discussion and then you shared with one another in smaller clusters your own think-alouds. Because, if I want you to walk away with one thing, it's that this idea that uncertainty can be an opportunity to open our eyes and to create diagnoses, trust, and safety. And that there are all these practices associated with doing that, but it's really our two tools, our attention and our language, and the dynamic interaction between the two of those tools that is how we do that. So with that in mind, why don't we just take a minute to look at this image. This is at the Art Gallery of Ontario. If anybody makes it up to Toronto, it's incredible, and I wish we could see it in 3D. But why don't we just take a couple minutes to have throw a few initial observations and thoughts out there, and then I'm going to have you just chit-chat with each other and do some think alouds, and then people can start to wander out, and I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. So let's just start with a quiet moment to take this in. Could I have the lights again, please? Oh, could I have them down? Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so what is happening here? Okay, what's happening here? Any hands? If I can even see you. Surprise. What do you see that makes you say that? Here? Here? Okay, so bringing up this possibility of surprise, looking at the expression on what appears to be a face here in the middle, the open mouth, the wide eyes, and what was it about these areas? I didn't quite hear. Flaps that have gone out. Okay, so as if something's sort of like splaying out in a moment of surprise and reaction. Okay, what more can we find? Okay, the possibility of metamorphosis. What do you see that makes you say that?
There's a bull that's kind of traipsing out on that side there. There's two different types of heads or faces at the top. Looks like a foot there where your little thing is. And there's some kind of spikes or little creatures coming out from the bottom there. Something is kind of transforming.
Okay, so noticing we have these other animal shapes that appear to be sort of protruding or emanating out from within, and thinking that perhaps it is in the process of transforming. Okay, what more can we find?
Looks like it's made of bone.
Okay, so wondering about the material and thinking it might be made of bone. What do you see that makes you say that? Okay, great. So noticing these gradations in terms of color and also in texture, calling to mind what we know about bone. Okay. Maybe one more comment.
About confinement. Like hellish.
Hellish confinement.
Like confinement.
What do you see that makes you say that?
I mean, partly it's the hardness of the material, and then things seem to be trying to escape from the rigid form that they're encased in. It's sort of a hellish depiction of confinement.
Okay, so we talked sort of earlier about like the possibility of metamorphoses and things transferring over. I think I hear you suggesting something different, that all these forms are maybe not emanating out, but stuck from within and trying to move out, but are in fact confined in a way that feels hellish. And what do you see that makes you say that?
Expression, the sort of the dynamic sense of movement stuck in bone or stone. I don't know, using a medical analogy, it's like a disease almost. It's like a person who's confined to their disease. That can be a hellish experience.
Okay.
Something of that nature.
Okay, great. So really just like underscoring this sense of stuckness and hellishness, and connecting that to what it can be like in living with disease. Okay, so this is like really awful to only do it for a few minutes and not go deeper, but could I have the lights up, please? But we've jogged some thinking here, and so for our last couple of minutes together, could you just turn to the 2 or 3 or 4 people in your clustered area and just practice thinking aloud? You don't have to have resolution or the answer, but simply see what it feels like to share your reasoning or your line of thought with your neighbor. How you approach it. And feel free to ask each other, what do you see that makes you say that?
Oh yeah, that thing just pulled underneath that one.
Okay, maybe 30 more seconds and we'll wrap up. It is so great to hear all this conversation. It's great. Okay, so in our last 5 minutes together, and I'm happy to stick around for more questions. I realize we're sort of forcing a premature end here, but I'd actually like for you to think for a moment about one thing that you're going to take from this, one thing you would like to do. And think about how you are going to do that. And go back to talking with your clusters and share those with one another. You're still talking about the art. I want you to think about one thing that you might do in terms of taking think alouds or taking pauses, or one way in which questioning frames. One thing you might do as a result of these art viewing experiences. And one thing, because I can't come here and go all over the place giving lectures and have everybody do nothing. So think about one thing, one practice you're going to do, and how you might do that. And talk to each other about that. Yes, do you have a question? Yes, this is yes, this is called Respecting the Circle. I will tell you, yes, I can give you the information on this artist. What I will do.
She thought I was talking about a different room or something like that. That's happened before as well, where I go in thinking one thing and whoa, that was really wrong. But very often, or if I
Okay, so we're 1 minute of. Let's hear one or two comments. What are you going to do, and how are you going to do that? Is anybody brave? Be brave and share one thing you would like to do in your practice. Yes. Great. Okay, great. So you are talking about shifting from a pronouncing and rushing ahead to encouraging thinking aloud on teams. And I hear you even saying what you want to do is encourage others thinking aloud and hear it, as opposed to your own thinking aloud. I mean, your own thinking aloud too, but you're most curious about supporting others think alouds within team discussions. Fantastic. Other thoughts about what you would like to do, what you plan to do? Yes?
I'm not a physician. I've never had a practice. But I'm going to aspire to be less reactive.
Mm.
That second piece of art that we looked at there, my first take on that is that's so ugly, I'm going to do it twice that. But now,
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking, well, just
Yeah.
hold it down, John.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to hold it down, John, a little bit? That's great. Yeah. Okay, so so we all have our reactions to things. So allowing that, but also staying with it a little longer, and letting things land with you. Great. Okay. Any last hacks? Yes.
Can you say something about
Yeah.
how that got settled?
Yeah, so this is he's a First Nations artist in Canada, Manasseh Akbaliapik. It's called Respecting the Circle. He had it's an incredible piece. It's about this big, and you walk around it. I I can't really comment on it. It's sort of, it really is like full of life and all of its cycles. I can tell you that he had a very hard life, and I believe he lost his wife and his child in an accident. And his art making was very much about his, his own resilience and moving on and living through uncertainty. His art making was part and parcel to that. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Please stay in touch. May the force be with you. My best wishes, my gratitude for everything you do. I'm happy to stick around and continue to answer any questions or have discussions if people want to, but we are a couple minutes past the hour, so I want to respect everybody's time. But thank you. Thank you.